Ready? Right. Well, welcome everybody. Is that working?
Yes.
Okay. Now this is a panel discussion which Carl has asked me to chair, and we have 5 speakers. And I think what we'll do is ask them to introduce themselves and to talk briefly, perhaps 5 minutes each, on what they're doing, what they plan to do, why they're here today. So I might start with Mary down the end, if I may. Can I start with you? Here's the mic. I'll have you.
Thank you, David, and thank you. It's very humbling to be here today. I'm a little nervous because there are far more expert people here doing very exciting work than I'm already aware of. But I'm here. So my name is Mary. I'm here for, I suppose, a couple of reasons. And I'm a graduate here at Campion, and that has set me off on my lifelong love of the liberal arts. And now as a parent to 4 children, and I met my husband Paul here, we are very much interested in what is happening across education, certainly for our own children, but I guess always very interested in seeing what is happening across the board, across the culture, and recognising what a key role this movement has in that discussion. And so myself, whilst I'm busy at home with the kids these days, I have also embarked on a bit of a journey to work in dare I say it, in this room, government, and as a tarnished bureaucrat in some respects. But I'm very interested in regulatory matters and recognising that these create the challenges and hurdles for good enterprises like schools. And so I continue on a path where I've involved myself in some school boards, and I have to leave today for a school meeting, but continue to work across risk and governance and management of schools. And so, but I have very much a strong interest in how we can best and quickly deliver education in time for our children. As you say, it does feel a little bit urgent these days, knowing it's a tremendous task to get schools up and going. And one respect to that is that I've really followed along closely the liberal arts projects across the country, liberal arts schools, but also interested in what's happening in parallel and somewhat independently in the Christian school sector. And in terms of establishing new independent schools, I think there's a lot of leadership that they can provide, because the majority of schools in this country that are not Catholic schools are founded by Christian churches most typically. And I find it interesting that it is the biggest growth sector in Australia. Schools, parents are looking for alternatives, not just Catholics, not just evangelicals. Homeschooling has really grown as well. And the Independent Schools Association have projected that in the next 10 years we need something like 750 new independent school campuses to meet the growing demand. Whereas I checked their report, and last year we had 7 new schools open. So we're not on track. Anyway, thank you. I'm really interested to learn from the others. I suppose I'll leave it at that, because I'm sure the questions will come. But for now.
Thank you, Mary. That was wonderful, actually, and I'm sorry to throw you in the deep end first, but somebody has to do it. Might I just interject one comment? To have Mary and Fennell here, who were students here in my time, over a decade ago, is such a great joy for me. So Fennell, over to you. Would you tell us about yourself?
Thank you, David. So I've prepared my notes. If you'll excuse me, I find I speak a bit better when I have thought intensively about what I want to say. And I guess this is, in some ways, a defence of or justification for a liberal arts education. So it's something that I've been wrestling with myself, this idea of why a liberal arts education. I am a mother of 4 children, aged 8, 6, 4 and 2. And I'm currently in discussions with some other parents from Western Sydney who are exploring the possibility of establishing a Catholic liberal arts high school. So I guess the most obvious reason for why I think a liberal arts education is something I should consider for my own children is that I've been a beneficiary of one myself. So as a graduate of Campion College, not a day will go by where I don't draw upon the intellectual inheritance that I have learnt about here. It fuels my mind intellectually, it guides my decision making, it influences how I raise my children, what I teach them, the stories I share. It's deeply embedded in how I perceive my life, how I choose to live, and what I think is worth doing. It's essentially been of immeasurable benefit to me in my daily life, and so it also begs another question, which is it chance that the liberal arts have been so helpful to me, or is there something inherent in them, or perhaps in us, that explains why it's so transformative? So I think the answer to that can actually be found within the tradition itself, and to highlight it, I'll just take us back to Aristotle. In the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle teases out what it is about the human person which is unique to them. He's hopeful that by doing so, if we can work out what their function is, what it is that humans do, we can work out what happiness or flourishing looks like, because it will be them performing their function well or excellently. So Aristotle takes us through some of the contenders for the function of the human person. First, he considers life and growth, nutrition. If we just eat and grow really well, will we be flourishing? Aristotle says no, plants do as much, humans do more. Next, he considers animals and the life of perception. Plants can't do that, animals can perceive, they see you and I. Could this be the function of human persons? No, we do more than perceive, we do more than just live. Finally, Aristotle comes to his proposition of the rational principle, the capacity of humans to reason. Essentially, Aristotle says that yes, the function of the human person is to reason. So the ultimate end of a human is to reason well, to use our minds excellently. And this, I believe, is what the liberal arts seek to aid. It also ties very beautifully in with the Christian view that man is made in the image and likeness of God. It is precisely man's ability to reason which resembles God's own likeness. The Christian understands that we do not value reasoning for its own sake, but rather because it is our capacity to reason which both reflects God and which enables us to pursue him. As JP2 said, the rational capacity of humans is our capacity to know and choose what is true and good. So he's saying that by our reason we come to know and choose good and true. And this is why the liberal arts are so valuable, because when we study the best that has been thought and said, what we are doing is what we are made to do. We are using our rational capacity to apprehend and choose what is true and good. When we are fulfilling our telos, when we are flourishing, when we are expressing our humanity when we are flourishing, we are expressing our humanity more fully. And in that sense, we are expressing our freedom. After all, the term liberal arts means free. The free arts is distinct from servile or tasks of necessity. It is in this liberal space of reasoning, not for work or for productivity or for sustenance, but for truth and for goodness, that we are expressing ourselves most freely in a way that creatures bound to a life of necessity could never do. So when we use our reason to pursue ideas of goodness and truth, we are doing more than just surviving. You might say it is when we are most human, or as the Christian would put it, most godlike. Now these ideas have a tendency to sometimes sound far away, airy-fairy or excessively conceptual. But like so many before me, I have experienced the reality of the liberal arts and what they have to offer the human person. The fruits of this are concrete. They are there for the taking. I believe that God made us in his image to pursue him, and the liberal arts tradition is one expression of this wondrous capacity we have. It is a living expression of the rational capacity of mankind, which has been continually engaged with and which continues to offer relevance and value to us today. In essence, the liberal arts help me to pursue what is true and good. They liberate me from an existence limited to utility, survival, or God forbid, productivity. They help me to strive to live in a way which authentically and freely expresses my humanity. And this is something which I very much desire to give my own children. Thank you.
The next speaker is Tim Mitchell. I'm just going to grab a chair, sorry, excuse me.
I'm not going
Thank
to do
you,
that
Tim.
long.
Over to you, Tim. Thank you very much if you do the same things for us.
Thank you, David. In talking about why I started liberal arts school, I'm tempted to use 3 words. What Dale said. But more seriously, as opposed to the opposite of not funny, the reasons for starting a school, in this case Campion College in Sydney, not Brisbane. You're still suffering from jet lag, aren't you? Is partly personal, and I'll get onto that, but objectively for reasons that have been discussed broadly already. My wife Penny, who's here, and I, and some other parents got together in early 2000, just 4.5 years ago, 2020, I'm sorry, 4.5 years ago, and said, should we do this? And everyone said, yeah. And that was just when COVID was starting. And having some experience in the grimy world of politics, I thought, well, if we're going to make this happen, let's go to the top. So we commissioned a delegation to go and see Archbishop Anthony Fisher, who Dale had lunch with yesterday. And long story short, he gave us the imprimatur. So that was a huge fillip to get going. But of course, everybody does these things in their own context. And I have heard stories from colleagues, especially Diff, who I talk to regularly, and James Power in Brisbane about what they're doing. Everyone's in their own context and everyone's got their own challenges, and we've certainly had ours. So when you start a liberal arts school in the Catholic intellectual tradition, you do need one virtue, and that's the virtue of patience. Because the fire might be there, the sticks might be being rubbed together, but nothing is going to happen overnight. And that's why we're reaching out for an accelerant to add to the fire. And that accelerant has manifested itself for us in the name of the Chesterton Schools Network. And I've had the great pleasure of getting to know many of the people involved in that in the last 2 years. Went to the Schools Network Conference 2 years ago, and 2 Chesterton Society conferences in America in the last 2 years, which has been wonderful. And I also just echo that comment about the number of converts to Catholicism through Chesterton was just, I wasn't aware of that. It was mind-blowing to me, talking to people in the States about the effect Chesterton's had on the conversion in this era. So, just on a personal note, I think I'm a victim of modern education. I remember having a wonderful Marist brother called Brother Kevin Hurley, who's now been deceased for over 10 years. But that man probably taught me more about character than anybody in my life. One day as a Year 9 student, I was down in the dirt picking up rocks on what became the Bruce Stadium in Canberra. And we were picking up rocks to earn our brownie points so that we could go on a Duke of Edinburgh award trip, which was 10 days out in the back of Bourke, shooting feral things. And I said to brother, must have been something about picking up rocks in the dirt and the heat. I said, brother, I can't even remember the question. I just remember the answer. He said, so you think you're an intellectual, Mitch? If I have to criticise Brother Kevin, it kind of taught me not to be an intellectual. I don't remember the question. I'm sure I wasn't being very intellectual. But I remember leaving school and encountering the word philosophy when I left school, and I didn't even know what that meant either. So stumbling through an arts degree at a very secular Sydney University in the early 80s, I eventually started to figure it out. So yes, I am a victim of modern education, And that's one of the strong motivating personal forces for wanting to introduce a great Catholic liberal arts school for our kids. In our case, we're obviously motivated by having our youngest son, who's only 13, and he's in year 7 at Hartford College. So a little bit about Hartford College. It started last year. It's a boys' school. We'd love to have a girls' school adjacent. That's something I'm sure will happen in time. So please pray for that. And it's going really well. We're not a school that's perhaps like a lot of Chesterton schools where families, homeschooling families on the fringe of a large city get together and say, we really need a good Catholic school, and everybody's wonderful big Catholic family. I'd say we're in a secular part of Sydney, and we're offering something that's quite different, pretty niche, and there's a lot of other educational offerings in the area. So this is context again. Everyone's context is different. So one of our challenges is marketing, telling the parents why this is such a good education, explaining it to them. That's a huge challenge. Again, Chesterton Schools Network will be an accelerant for us to help us in that task. And there's never enough resources for that. Just my final point is, as a motivator, to get a school like this going and see the results that we're already seeing. Boys that on the faith front are going to Mass on Sundays of their own volition, even though no one in their family has ever, not even Catholic, or ever gone to Mass, or ever thought that would be something you do. So getting together and going to Mass, that's a regular feature. Practicing the sacraments, all of these things, it's part of the core ethos. Having that culture in the school is just so essential. And it's early days, but we really are on a strong footing, and I feel very, very positive about the future. And I do recommend listening to Bishop Barron's talk on reaching the disaffiliated. Someone asked Dale about data. Well, if you want data in the opposite direction, listen to that talk on YouTube. I think it's 3 or 4 years old, and he talks about schools in America, Catholic schools, and young adults in their 20s being asked, why are you not practicing Catholic anymore? And generally the answer is, well, we were taught science really well. Like science, we understood maths and physics, but when it came to faith, it was just kind of, I don't know, a bit lame, a bit sort of social justice, and that was about it. Nothing wrong with social justice. You get into the real world and you have a robust science education, but you don't have anything on the faith side. They don't integrate. So hence, that's the thing we have to address. That was the number 1 or 2 reason why young adults said they don't practice their faith anymore. The disconnect between faith and science.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much. Jeff Crowther is our next speaker, and you'll again put yourself into context, please.
No worries, thanks, David.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
So I'm a teacher. I've been teaching for 15 years, and after about 5 years of teaching, I asked a question that I should have asked a lot earlier, which was, what is the point of teaching? What is the point of education? I got into it because I enjoyed hanging out with young people and putting on plays and making movies, and it was a lot of fun. But at some point I asked a deeper question, and when you start thinking about those sorts of things, you find there is a neglected intellectual tradition and a neglected history of education that no one talks about anymore. I was a Protestant. I was teaching in an independent Christian school, and I want to echo what Mary said. There are a lot of Protestant schools that are very interested in this as well. The classical education movement in the States is really dominated by Protestants far more than Catholics, although the Catholics are really catching up, which is great. I discovered the liberal arts and wanted my school, Taunton Christian College, to become a liberal arts school. And they were sola scriptura, Bible-believing Protestants, and so when I started talking about pagan philosophers, this was a struggle. Let alone talking about virtue, which is also actually a struggle, surprisingly enough. I created something called the Aquinas Fellowship, and it was a after-school club that met once a week for 2 hours, and we just did liberal arts. It was for grades 10, 11 and 12. I would handpick the students. They would go all the way through. One of my Honours Fellowship students is actually a student here at Campion at the moment. And after a few years, it was able to be modelled to the school what it could look like. I encouraged the leadership to come down to the Dawson Centre in Hobart that David runs. And in 2018, they decided to become a liberal arts school. And they've been doing that ever since, and I would say probably, I mean, they're a school of 800. They're probably, to my knowledge, the biggest liberal arts school in Australia. They're still stumbling through it. It takes a long time to transition a school that already is in existence. But I am here speaking as the principal of St John Henry Newman College, which is starting in 2026 in Brisbane. We're starting Peter 3. And it started really because a group of families wanted to find a Catholic school and couldn't really. So my question for Dale before about why not start earlier, Dale's answer was they come from a lot of good parish schools. But if they're hard to find, which sometimes it seems as though they are, we need to start from the ground up. And some of those directors on the board of Newman College are directors here at Campion as well. Edmund O'Donovan, his wife Anne, very involved in the school. As soon as you decide that you want to start a Catholic school, the next question is, well, what should it look like? And there's an anthropology, a metaphysics, there's an ethics, there's aesthetics, there's all these things that are built into what Catholicism is that leads naturally to a classical education. I really genuinely believe that a truly Catholic education is a liberal arts classical education. I don't think those two things are separable personally. Now, you could get a very high quality education that doesn't integrate everything through the liberal arts and through the classical tradition, but I think you're going to end up there. The closer you get, the more classical you're going to get. And I'd also say for me personally, it was my conversion journey. I also don't think that you can get really into the liberal arts and into classical things, or at least this is the case for me, without finding yourself crossing the Tiber, which I did with my family earlier this year. And it started actually with Chesterton. I read Orthodoxy when I was 21, and the chapter, The Ethics of Elfland, revealed to me this idea of an enchanted reality. When we live in a disenchanted world, and I think the simplest definition of what we're trying to do at Newman College is to re-enchant reality for our students, to help our students to see the enchanted nature of reality, the sacramental nature of reality. The interest is huge. Our context is we've got other struggles. Our struggles aren't necessarily enrolment. We've got over 60 kids or students just from Peter 3 already interested. A number of them have families have already paid a non-refundable fee, and we haven't even got buildings yet. So people are lining up for it, as are teachers writing from all over Australia interested in coming to the school. So that's my journey in classical education, and that's St John Henry Newman College.
I've had the pleasure of knowing the first four speakers very well for a long time. But Sam I've never met before, I don't think, and he's here representing his Augustine Academy, a wonderful little institution which I've visited. So Sam, over to you, if you would do your intro, your spiel.
Of course. Well, I'm, as David said, representing the Augustine Academy, which many people in the Campion community are probably familiar with. In fact, there are many Campion students who came through the Academy. And it's a certificate for liberal arts college that was started 8 years ago, and I've been working with them on and off for the past 5, and I'm now their Dean of Studies and full-time history teacher. And they were started by Ben McCabe and his brother in 2016 with the vision of providing for young, predominantly Catholic students, but also we take in students from other denominations and from a data faith background as well. But the interest of providing them as they reach the high school age, whether from homeschooling or from a schooling background, an avenue into university that wasn't simply the meat grinder that is the HSC program in Australia, which as as Dale was mentioning, we learn a lot in fragments quite often in the schooling system, and we don't see the whole picture. And so the Academy was there to provide students with a way of seeing the truth in all its many facets, in the full beauty of it, and that thereby prepare them for university in a way that they wouldn't become then ground down by the further systems, which so often are hostile to people of faith, to Catholics, to Christians of all stripes in the secular university context. Now, many don't go to secular universities. Many do come here to Campion, which is a brilliant model of liberal arts education. But the Academy is fundamentally about equipping people with that strength of character, of education, of particularly ethics, virtue, skills of leadership, and a commitment to their faith that will make them not only interesting people in the world and the workplace, but also people who are able to stand up against just the difficulties of life as it is, continually seems to mount against people of my generation and younger. So the Academy, as I said, it's been running for 8 years now, and it's had its many ups and downs in that time. We've had to move campus several times. We've just moved again nearby to Sydney in the beautiful Southern Highlands area. But we've also struggled with issues of accreditation, and recently that's been a mountain that we've been trying to scale with the group that's been providing us with accreditation, possibly closing that branch down, no longer having support for it from the government. So part of what I've been doing recently is helping Ben to look for other accreditation pathways that will keep the Academy running and providing this, not just education, but this strengthening to young men and women who are coming from high school backgrounds and want to enter university. And so what's been remarkable as we've looked at other pathways for the Academy to take has been the response we've gotten from universities and other groups when they see what we provide. So recently I helped Ben get into contact with some people from the University of New England in Armidale, and in their conversations with Ben they became so impressed by what the Academy offered that they hinted that even if we weren't able to get accreditation in the coming year, that simply on the strength of what we provide for students alone, they would accept at their institution. So it just goes as a testament to what we, the Academy, have been able to provide and have been consistently providing for almost a decade now, is something that even a secular university will look at and say, this is more involved than some of our first year units, and this counts for more than just a ticket in. This could actually be almost equivalent to a diploma or something. So we are really passionate and motivated to continue, despite whatever difficulties face us in the future, providing the core of what the Chesterton schools in the United States provide, what Campion College here provides, which is a foundation in truth. And as I said, the fact of the matter is whether we have a government stamp at the end of the day then, for the course we provide, it doesn't change the material of the course itself. And that material is rich and it's wonderful, and it provides students with more than simply something to think about and reflect on. It's not just an intellectual, a totally mental and even totally spiritual education, it's a hands-on education. And so the Academy students have always been, sometimes with a lot of complaining, involved in agricultural efforts, endeavours, they learn to dance, they put on plays and do drama activities. It's an education that encompasses not just the mind, the spirit, but the body as well. And so it means getting out into the fields and digging potatoes, which they complain about every week. Fortunately, I don't have to deal with that. It's not my thing to enforce them to do that, but yeah, they do love griping about it. But at the end of the day, they all love it as well. And they're all very proud of the peas that they grow, and they're all very proud of the various other things that come out of the ground. And it's on that I believe, it's in this regard that I believe the liberal arts model offers something that is very special. Because at the end of the day, the liberal arts model, in any context, isn't just about thinking and feeling and believing. It is about doing. And it does inspire us to go out there and to live a life of engagement, of connection. And as was mentioned by many others previously, we live in a world that's thoroughly de-enchanted quite often, and Chesterton is one of those great things. He reminds us to look at the beauty of the world again, And when we take that seriously, that means an involvement in the physical creation and in the actions and activities that connect us to matter, to the physical world. So just on that, I'm also currently a part of another startup which the Academy may partner with in years to come, which is called Atlas, the Australian Academy of Trade and Liberal Arts Studies. And the vision of Atlas is to hopefully in the next few years begin an institution that can combine both certificate courses in practical trades, so carpentry, electricians, plumbers, right, with a diploma in the liberal arts. And so we've been working to put a curriculum through to the Board of Education and to have an RTO come under our name so that we can begin offering something that I don't know that is offered anywhere in Australia or maybe possibly in the world to this day, which is young men and women who enter an institution and 2 years later come out with a year knocked off an apprenticeship and a year knocked off a university degree, and they have a pathway to look at both things. They can go out and become someone who builds a house, but does so with the knowledge of Vitruvius, with the knowledge of Da Vinci, or they can become someone who sits in university but doesn't completely fall apart when their wheel needs changing, or when they, So that's a vision that the Ben McCabe has been very excited to look into, and I'm involved in hopefully moving along with that. But it's very exciting, I think, to be involved in this moment in the liberal arts in Australia, because there is so much good, and there's such a need for it that, I love that anecdote that there were more teachers applying than there were students in the first year of the Chesterton Conference, because it does feel like it's not just that there are young people desperate for this kind of education, but there are people desperate to deliver it and be a part of it on the other end too.
Okay, thanks Sam very much. We'll come to questions in a moment. There is plenty of time. I just wanted, first of all, Sam is the Dean of Studies. Unfortunately, the Dean of Potatoes wasn't able to.
No.
But I did want to ask you one question, and I think it might be of interest to others. You used the system, didn't you, to get, for your students, I think you moved them towards a TAFE Certificate 3, right? Which
yes.
in 1 year, that was Cert 4, which meant that would be acceptable as a matriculation to Campion and to other institutions.
That's been what we've offered in the past, yes.
Yeah,
to offer
but you've lost
Cert 4.
that.
It's up in the air. So this is why I've been working to help start this other group, Atlas, because it will ideally offer another avenue towards certs and diplomas, but also alongside that in parallel, a practical certificate as well. Yeah.
Okay, that's terrific. Thank you. Now, questions, anybody? We've got a fair bit of time. We've got about 20 minutes. Yes. Oh, please. Sorry, I'm slow-witted.
There are a number of people who have spoken this morning about the STEM versus liberal arts. And it seems to me that that is an artificial war that's developed in knowledge through the modern period. My question is, what are your respective thoughts about how to integrate maths and science with the liberal arts and show your students that they are actually part of a continuum?
Thanks, Gary, very much. Russ, would like to take that? Please.
One of the distinctions is between STEM and arts, which is a bit different to STEM and liberal arts. Mathematics, obviously, if we're going to talk about the trivium and the quadrivium, then mathematics plays a really central part in the liberal arts tradition. And I don't think a classical liberal education doesn't pay any heed to them at all. I think it absolutely should and does. And it's different across different ages. So St John Henry Newman College will have very limited use of technology, particularly in primary school. But again, we're not anti-technology. It's just about using it when it's appropriate. The fact is that schools at the moment think that it's appropriate all of the time and market themselves on perhaps having iPads. And that's just not the right time for them to do it. They're not evil, but they are evil for prep, to a point. I think I can get away with saying that. The integration, particularly in the early years, the integration between those things one of the beautiful ways of doing it is historically. So every science has a history. And so if you're going to teach about science, if you're going to teach some scientific idea, and when you teach science to very early young children, you do teach very fundamental things, which were the first things in science to be discovered. So you're talking about inclined planes, and you're talking about corkscrews and things like that. And so you can teach the history of these subjects. Just like mathematics has an amazing history. Why not start with Euclid? Now, you're not going to start with Euclid with preps and think that they're going to understand Euclid, but there's a history to all of these things that can be integrated. And because there's a history to them, there is also a corresponding literature, philosophy, and theology a lot of time with all of these things as well. So the integration just happens by default. What it requires, and this is what's tricky, and this is where at least I can speak for Australia, where the Australian education training process has become so problematic, is it requires people that are interested in everything. It requires teachers that don't become teachers because they love a subject, but it requires teachers that love truth and love history and want to learn about everything. Because you can't integrate what you don't know, and you can't leap from one thing to another with all the actual real exciting realities of what happened over time if you don't know anything about it. But that's why I think one of the big roles for educational institutions is to train teachers. We can't assume that it's going to happen at university. They just don't know it. And I speak to prep teachers who are teaching in classical liberal schools, and they're terrified of the fact that they need to know history. They just love little kids. That's why they became prep teachers. And so at one point you just want to say, hey, the pressure's off, but also I think one of the most important things we can do for professional development is to sit around together and read history and to talk about great books. Because their formation, the teacher's formation, is what is going to result in the student's formation.
That's great, thank you. Who else would like to tackle that one?
Yes. I was just going to add again, my first year of teaching academy was to teach the history of science to students. And I fully agree that you just need more people who are interested in everything. It's part of the issue, both on the side of the students and the teachers. But I think if there is a difference, and if there is a reason why often subjects like philosophy and history and literature seem to form the core of liberal arts over sciences, is because I think what we're lacking today is people who, we lack people who know who they are and where their culture stands and where they fit in that culture. And fundamentally what science teaches us is what the world is. And so we have plenty of people who can tell us all about what the world is and give us conflicting opinions on that. But it doesn't necessarily form the heart. And so I think while it has a huge place in the liberal arts, I think why so many liberal arts colleges have focused on things like history, philosophy and literature is because they answer the question of who you are and should be. And then that equips you to go out and then ask what the world is. But to know your place through history, to know the nature of the human condition through literature, to understand the metaphysics of all of that through philosophy, I think often needs to come first in this cultural context before we look into the sciences.
That's good. Anybody else to deal with it? Yes, Mary, please.
Thank you. Just very quickly, the only thing I would add is possibly the best defence for STEM here today is only that in my own education, you know, pursuing maths and science became the antidote to an impoverished humanities at school. And so it was a safer way to get a more rigorous and beneficial use of my time. What's interesting now with AI and technology is that I think we're in a position where, even since my time at Campion, where it was a very difficult sell to advertise the benefits of a liberal arts education, and STEM was just the hot word of the day and still is. But what I've found following closely along too in terms of what the world of work is demanding of people now is that the liberal arts is more sellable than ever, and that's because AI takes care of STEM in a very self-sustaining way, in a large way, and so the skills that are imparted through storytelling and knowledge about who we are actually, I'm quite hopeful that they can be very quickly popularised in some sense in that context.
That's good. There was Oh, somebody else?
Just very
Yes,
quickly,
right. There was a gentleman down the back. Yes, please.
Just very quickly on that question, from a governance point of view, we're still a little bit embryonic, so trying to measure the answer to that question, we're just not there yet, but we've got lots of ideas. So for instance, and this is contextual, we're right next to New South Wales University, arguably the best or top 2 or 3 STEM universities in Australia. So we are planning a University Connects program, so year 8 boys onwards are going, visiting that university, seeing what sort of research is being done, and then connecting that to get the culture of the teachers is so important, because if they're doing some philosophy, Aristotelian prime mover theory, well then, for example, how does that connect to submolecular physics? How do you draw those connections? So integrating those ideas comes back to teacher culture, and we'll try and measure that and give you an answer in a couple of years.
Okay, good. Gentleman down the back. I'll bring you the mic.
Thank you.
Yeah, just in case.
I sometimes feel like I'm a foreigner here because my background is in engineering, computing and everything like that. I'd just like to share something about the course that I did in Year 11 and 12 physics when I was a student at Liverpool Boys High School. It was produced by an organisation called Harvard Project Physics. And what we did was to actually learn about the scientific discoveries in physics. We actually recreated the experiments that were performed by people like Kepler, Newton. We learned something about the philosophy, the culture of the time as well. And I think if you just take each science by itself and teach it as an island, without understanding that any island has also had a lot of things come from other islands and share that connectedness, then you will bring a lot more into it. And looking at the history of science, the history of a particular discipline, in my case, was probably the best way to really understand it and understand the growth of knowledge and understand that science is not something that just stays as it is and never changes. It grows with knowledge, not only from within itself, but from also other disciplines, which can be the humanities too.
No, please.
Can I just speak to that and say, I think that's so true. We did a unit here at Campion called the History and Philosophy of Science, and ultimately science is done by humans. And so I think there's this tendency to deify science now, where science kind of is or can't be questioned or is perfect, whereas real scientists know that it's a process done by humans and it's constantly trying to uncover the reality that's there. So I think, to my mind, science goes really well with a liberal arts education because you better understand science by understanding mankind, effects, processes, how things don't occur in isolation.
Thanks, Neil. Anybody else there? I've got another question on my left and two. I've got one here, one there. Okay, now, Connor, please.
Thank you. Hearing about digging up potatoes and such, it got me thinking about nature and the role of nature in education. We were hearing about St. Francis and the account of St. Francis's life from G.K. Chesterton, which was a great book that I enjoyed, and I loved hearing from him about how nature was kind of freed by being grounded in a proper supernatural foundation. And also, we're going to hear about John Senior as well, and he enjoyed great times on his ranch, I think, as well, and grew up as a sort of a cowboy. I'm just wondering, in terms of the panel, where do you see the potential benefits of the reintegration of nature into education? And then also maybe you might also comment on perhaps the dangers of, as you were saying, deifying science, but people also deify nature as well. and there's the great idolatry of environmentalism as well. Basically, where do you see the role of nature in terms of education or in the initiatives that you are pursuing? Thank you.
Again, you've got to be creative in your context. I'll say very briefly, in our context, we have Indigenous people down the road living in La Perouse who can trail their ancestral line right back to when Governor Phillip was running this colony. I happen to be good friends with some of them, and I want them to come and tell us about nature. Because we're in Australia, what better place than to ask the Indigenous people about that? But obviously it's a cross-cultural conversation too. It's not like we're suddenly trying to become an Indigenous spiritual centre.
Yeah, the classical tradition, classical education in the States is where possible, engaged outside in nature as much as possible, particularly in the early years. So an early years play-based approach to education that is outside, in the dirt, climbing trees, letting kids be kids is massive. And it's beautiful, and it's what kids want, and it's a beautiful way to learn, and they do learn doing that. It's not always possible, and so there's an ideal and then there's reality, and you have to try to work within that. I think C.S. Lewis talks in The Abolition of Man, he uses he refers to the concept, Augustinian concept of auto amoris as being kind of the centre of education, of responding rightly to reality, ordinate affection, auto amoris, the ordinate affection of reality. And responding rightly to reality includes responding rightly to nature. So I think within the context of the true, the good and the beautiful, you're not going to get drawn into the environmental idolatry that you're talking about, because you're going to understand it fully. You're going to understand it for what it is, but also for what it isn't. But there's a school in the States called Gregory the Great Academy, which is for boys, in which they spend a lot of their time outside. They've got a creek running through their property, they do archery, they go fishing, all of that sort of stuff, which is unfortunately missing. If you go back 30, 40, 50 years, all of our kind of public institutions have crumbled. Everyone used to do maybe all of these different clubs, like I think the scouting movement, which I was a scout, my kids have done a bit of Cubs, and that institution is very different to what it used to be. They've jumped on the woke train in a really big way, and safety and insurance has come in to the point where good luck lighting a fire, whereas I'm pretty sure that's all I used to do, was light fires. It was great. But that's actually one of our big struggles. The idea that I could let kids climb trees at my school, the insurers won't let me do that. And so this is why schools are not the fix. Schools are part of hopefully renewing a culture which ultimately is about the family. Schools support the family because parents can let their kids climb trees. I might not be able to, but I can certainly encourage parents to do that. So schools working with parents and the church, that's the way that this happens. It doesn't make up for a disconnected, disengaged family, and it doesn't make up for a church that nobody attends.
That's terrific, thank you, yeah. Yes. Sam, did you want to speak on that one?
Oh, I don't have much to say other than the Academy has always been in rural and bush context, so it's where it is now, it's where it was when it was based out of Tumut, and it started in a similar environment too. So it just depends on the model. Like obviously if you want to base a school in a city where you'll have, where it's probably most need for it, it might be harder because there's not as many beautiful places like, Campion's on a lot big block of land, but it's probably very hard if you're starting one up now too. So the Academy is a boarding environment, which is not always going to be possible. But yeah, it's definitely, at least in the Academy's context, it's a huge part of everyday life. And I think it's very hard to fall into the trap of environmental ideology, which is so much fun, lighting fires and, as you said, right? It's just much fun, cutting trees down as is planting them. So.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Thank you all. I want to turn to looking at the situation in the classrooms for the schools. Now, I absolutely agree that the schools need to be supporting the family, and the schools can't do everything. But a contextual reality is as Women's Forum Australia has recently outlined, there was a survey done. I'm not sure where the survey was done, but I do trust Women's Forum Australia. Of 1,000 teachers, and over half of them have actually been sexually harassed by students. And so the reality of the schools that you guys are leading is, even with a lot of like homeschooled families, young boys are targeted online with this content. So they're victims as much as the women in the scenario. But as community leaders, what practical steps can you be taking in helping combat that within the schools to protect the boys who are victims, the girls who become victims of it, and the teachers as well?
I think the most encouraging thing I've been driving around interviewing families for Newman College. These are young families with young kids, and every single one of them is just thrilled that we're not going to have technology. Every single one of them, I think now the evidence is out that giving kids phones and the internet is a bad idea. So that doesn't come, what you're talking about doesn't come out of a vacuum, and you said it yourself, they get targeted online. And so the number one thing is just don't let them be online. And it's not that difficult, actually, but parents struggle, or at least they've spoken to me about the fact that they struggle with the peer pressure that their kids experience when they go to school. And so I at my old school, used to say at every single opportunity I had when I spoke to the students, I'd say get rid of the phones. Every time I was in front of parents, I said stop giving your kids phones. And I'm saying it now to all of our prospective parents, but this time they're all saying, oh, don't worry, we're not going to. And they are so excited to be coming to a school where they're joining a community of like-minded parents, where I think it's quite possible. Now, it's idealistic, but I'll be working extremely hard to create a little subculture of families where no one of these primary school kids has a phone. And I think that's a huge part in addressing this, is just to take away the access to it in the first place. The evidence is out. Jonathan Haidt's book is very clear about what tech and social media is doing to kids. And unlike I can't say all of us because we're all from different generations. I'll speak from my generation. I was the experimented on generation. And unlike us, or my generation, it's now clear. I think parents they might be ignorant, but as soon as they discover the truth, if they give their kids a phone and the internet after that fact, I would ask them why. It's possible just to avoid it completely.
I might just speak briefly to that as well. I have great confidence in the liberal arts tradition to form people in a way that they are motivated to live moral lives. So I think the way it works is you kind of, when you read about and grapple with the human condition writ large, so across history, literature, philosophy, theology, you can't help but learn. And it doesn't need to be moralistic, but you pick up on the idea of good and bad, and the good is desirable. So I think by teaching a liberal arts curriculum and combining it with not having things like devices, I have great hope that the students will, of their own volition, become better people and avoid some of those damaging behaviours.
Thanks, Vanille. And look, we've got time, I think, for one more gentleman over here. I'll take them. There we go, Peter.
I was losing hope as I made my way up to the conference this morning, but you guys have restored that, I have to say, in a very short time. It was a desperation point, but you've certainly given us, great joy, I think, in what you're doing there. Forget about fires. We had open air rifle range. Try bringing that one in. We used to carry our 303s on the train up to Single to the cadet camp. So try bringing that one back. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies, for your contribution. Very, very helpful.